things were completely out of my control. As you know, we can only control so much. And I was holding on to them and trying to force changes that I couldn't really make any meaningful difference.
Welcome to HUMED, another episode of HUMED. I am Dr. David Spiro, your host. This is a story where we unveil the human side of medicine. I am incredibly delighted and honored to have Dr. Jenna Taglienti with us. She is a psychiatry residency program director at Mather Hospital, Northwell Health, where she served since 2016. And she's also an assistant professor at the Zucker School of Medicine. She completed her residency at Stony Brook on Long Island, where I hail from, Long Island, New York, as we say Long Island, and earned her medical degree from the University of Buffalo. As a physician, educator, and writer, she explores the intersection of medicine, identity, and meaning. Her recent JAMA essay, which is how we got connected, on-time perspective and the physician experiences spark widespread reflection across the field. Your essay moved me, and I'm so honored to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us, Jenna.
Thank you so much. It's been, it's actually just an honor to be on this podcast and to be able to further the conversation.
Yeah, so, it's interesting because I have written one or two essays in JAMA around difficult experiences that I've had that have really personally affected me. And the name of the essay that JAMA has had for decades is called A Piece of My Mind. And it's really a place and a space for the written word to become vulnerable for many people. And I know I certainly have. And I would love to hear, and our audience to hear a little bit about the story that you want to share.
Sure. I think, I was doing pretty well on the surface. I was fully engaged in my work. I was leading, building, invested in developing people, the residents, the faculty. Nobody looking at me from the outside would have necessarily known that anything was off or that I was feeling out of balance. Actually, at the time, I didn't even really know I was out of balance. I thought I was doing pretty well overall, functioning, keeping my family and my work and sort of balancing it all. But, what was really going on, obviously, like the lung cancer, which was shocking. But when I had to take a step back for the medical leave, it really shifted things into perspective. Suddenly jarring, but in a really important way. I think really like looking back, part of what gave me the courage to share that vulnerable side, kind of like how you have shared and impacted others with your writing, was about a year ago. Our system had what they call a Stomp Out the Stigma event, which is where people, physicians, or we have like a CEO or, nurses, healthcare providers, they have a panel. And I was on the panel to share an impactful story or personal struggle or work-related issues with the residents or whoever decided to show up to this. And I thought, I was nervous and I was like, I've never done anything like this before. I don't even know what I could possibly share. I remember telling the wellness director, like, I don't know, like, maybe I don't have anything meaningful to share, but she was able to kind of, guide me. And I think everybody has a story, probably several stories that they could share from just getting through medical school, residency, becoming a doctor. We all have resilience and we've faced adversity in different ways and challenges. I was able to share this story. This was before my diagnosis of lung cancer. It was a different story. But I shed a little bit of tears, and it was real. It was authentic. It was from a vulnerable and raw place as well. And it was very powerful. I could tell that everybody on the panel had a huge impact on those people in the room. That's probably what gave me the courage to really put this out there into the world. But when I set out to write it, I actually wasn't setting out to write anything. I just was trying to process my own thoughts and feelings. And when I put it on paper, I was like, this might be something like the Stomp Out the Stigma event. Like maybe this is something I should share with residents and students. It might help somebody. And so I shared it with our uh, wellness director here at the system level, and she's the one that suggested submitting it to JAMA, which I had never thought of. If it wasn't for her, I would never have submitted this in the first place. So I did, and I'm really glad I did, because the amount of people that have reached out, it was able to impact is phenomenal. And just it goes to show we're all kind of struggling with some similar things, and you're not alone. And human connection at the end of the day is what we're all here for.
I agree. I talk about the idea of the most important thing in life is giving and receiving love, which is another way of saying deep human connection is the essence of life in some ways. And it's one of the reasons why I started the show, is to really unveil the aspect of medicine and the human aspects of it. So I would want to get back to something you said earlier. You said that you felt like you were well, but maybe you were unwell, and maybe you felt like things were just sort of ticking and moving along, but maybe they weren't. And I'm just curious, and we're physicians, right? So we understand, we've studied the human body. You're a physician that studies the mind and a psychiatrist, and then also has a role in teaching others and mentoring others in an academic environment. And so you have all these skills and this learnedness that we get when we go to medical school. I really am curious what you meant by that. If you could kind of go into what you meant by you felt potentially well, but maybe you were unwell.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and we could all probably relate to this on some level. But what I didn't fully recognize at the time when I was living it and just trying to get through day to day and solving the immediate problems in front of me is how much energy I was putting into things I couldn't control or move forward in a meaningful way. Um, I was holding on to those things, trying to fix them, and it adds up. A lot of the things were completely out of my control. As you know, we can only control so much. And I was holding on to them and trying to force changes that I couldn't really make any meaningful difference uh, the way I was doing it. So that was a struggle. It was more carrying that mental load and being frustrated with it. The thing I've realized since putting the JAMA article out and just thinking and reflecting a lot more on is that it helped me see that my voice could reach beyond my immediate environment, that there's other ways to amplify a message and contribute to change. And your impact doesn't have to be limited to your own system. I think that's really a huge message for anybody in healthcare, anybody struggling, is you can have an impact in different ways and reach broader audiences, kind of like what you're doing with this podcast. And it's meaningful. And if you're doing it in a way that gives you meaning and purpose and advocacy, which advocacy has always been something I'm passionate about. I've always advocated for residents and patients. I think being a doctor, you advocate for patients all the time. So it's our natural tendency and our natural instinct to do this. But if we want to move things that are out of our control, we as doctors need to be vulnerable, say the things that we don't say out loud, and spread these messages, because we're not alone in these struggles. A lot of people are dealing with this type of invisible load that they carry, whether it's their personal lives or work or both. And I was certainly carrying an invisible load from both home environment and work environment. And when you're just trying to survive day to day and solve the immediate things in front of you, you don't realize how much that could be getting in the way of you really enjoying the small moments. Like I think, so I told you my husband's a doctor too. So we talk about this and how you get like a text message or an email. Nowadays, you're just so accessible 24/7. And you prioritize that. Like you think that getting back to this person, whether it's urgent or not urgent, that takes priority over your family. Even though you know your family is probably number one, it's just a natural tendency, I think, for us to all do that and respond immediately, get it off our plate so we don't forget. But I certainly am going to be more aware of where I spend my energy. And like I said, time is finite. Your energy is a finite resource. We need to use it wisely.
So some of this, just in context, and you wrote about it in your article, that you were diagnosed with lung cancer. So I mean that is and you also mentioned in the article you've been a non-smoker, which is much more rare to find that diagnosis. So some of this in context is what I'm trying to understand. Is you wrote the JAMA article after you were diagnosed, but some of what you're talking about, the illusion of control, is an epiphany that you've had since the diagnosis. Was the diagnosis sort of a level set for you in some ways?
In a lot of ways, I never had the time to really reflect on it the way I was able to after I was placed on a medical leave for the cancer diagnosis. The whole getting diagnosed was horrific, and just, I was not in a good place for those first couple of weeks dealing with that. But it did give me perspective and this time to think and reflect that I never had the opportunity to do before. And I think that's where this all came from. It was just that you don't realize how medicine can really creep in over time. Nobody really realizes that. But the silence I experienced after the diagnosis, it it gave me time that I needed to really think about all this on a deeper level, and that I'm happy about, and I'm happy that I was able to share the story with other people to give it some kind of meaning when nothing makes sense to me. So to give other people some, if this has helped to them, then that helps me.
Well, I want to talk about a couple things. I'm very curious about this concept of the illusion of control. But I recently, and I'll share with the audience, I'd really like to have an episode around this with someone interviewing me. But I recently, I have known atherosclerosis, and I did not do well on, I had two small areas of concern on a stress test, and I had a catheterization, which is a big procedure, on Friday, and the outcome was not bad. I don't need any surgery. I don't need any hardware in my arteries. But the one word that I woke up with the next day, of course, I had Versed, so I was not right afterwards. But the one thing that really made me think over the weekend about was just appreciations. Like what what is really meaningful in my life and what is not meaningful in my life. And what I'm hearing, and I don't know if this is another way or it's a different translation of what you're saying, is that pre-diagnosis, and I relate because I'm a section chief, so I help support about 50 people in my group, and in a pediatric ER, which has its own issues, and I feel like I'm working 7 days a week, and accessibility, and then something like this happens, and you really realize the most important things are the people you love and who you're giving love and who you're receiving love from. And really everything else pales in comparison to that, like everything else. And, but that everything else is what we end up spending so much time on and worrying about and fretting about. And we get into arguments and we have stress and have all of these reactions to things that are not that important.
Right.
So I mean, this was a very meaningful medical experience to me, and I was incredibly moved by your article and the experience you've gone through. Jenna, how do we maintain that, that, that sort of level of clarity around continuing to prioritize the fact that we're alive, that we're breathing, that we're relatively healthy, that we have beautiful children, that we have beautiful partners in our life. We have beautiful, even professional relationships that we really engage with. How do we remind ourselves every day that we wake up that those are the important things and these other things are not that important?
It's a great question. And I think I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to be able to do this perfectly every day from here on out. I am going to be much more intentional every day about where I'm spending my mental energy and my finite resources to care, where I'm going to put that to be able to create a bigger impact, and where I'm not going to put it when it's not going to be meaningful. I think that's easier said than done, especially when you care so much, and I think physicians and all healthcare providers just care so much that it's easy to get swept up into some of these things where you see injustices or things that don't make sense. And it's just really frustrating when you're trying to do the right thing. But I'm going to make it part of my routine that at the end of the day, I'm going to write some stuff down very briefly, and I'm going to decide what I'm going to tackle tomorrow, where I'm going to put my energy, and I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it at work. And I'm going to cherish the moments with my family. And I will always be accessible to the residents as a program director, but not for non-urgent things. And so they could contact me for emergencies or anything like that, but I will be purposeful with what I respond to when I respond to it, and try to leave all of that at work. And I've I can't unsee what I felt and how this all shifted for me to make it so clear. But every moment with my family and my personal life and hobbies and things that I enjoy doing, I'm going to protect that.
So what, we're physicians, and I assume that you're still in your role, you're teaching, you're also still seeing patients. Is that fair? So how is this is it going to change the way that you engage with patients as a physician?
It probably won't for me. More of my struggle with balance came from that invisible load that I was talking about, more of the frustrations of the day to day, at trying to advocate for the residents for learning and to environments and protecting them. As you know, residents are at the lowest end of the hierarchy, and it can be they need somebody to advocate for them because they don't feel like they have a voice most of the time, or if they do speak up, there's really not the potential for good is very low compared to how high of a risk it would be for a resident to speak up with where they are in the hierarchy. That is being a program director is really meaningful for me because I get to speak for the people that can't or feel they can't speak up because the stakes are just too high. That's where I need to balance a bit better. With patients, I could always, the boundaries were clear for me. They've always just come easier for me with the patients. I mean, don't get me wrong. If something really awful happens, I'm going to think about it. And I think every doctor's going to think about it. It could certainly bleed into the evening, and that's just going to happen from time to time. But for me, it was the day-to-day struggles and issues and trying to do what I felt is right, but systems and hierarchies and everybody has different priorities. So where you spend your energy matters, and it can't come at the expense of your own ability to feel like you're in it and living in your life and not like living alongside your life.
Yeah, I can relate to that. What about your relationships with, if you don't mind sharing, relationships with your children, right? We're parents and we're spouses. And do you think you have a different perspective on, because sometimes we feel like medicine is it, right? For some people, and everyone has their own judgment and how they weigh things in their life. For some people, medicine is more important than family. I personally, and I advocate for family to always trump this thing that we do as being physicians and mentors and teachers. Um, and so I remember when I was younger and I had younger children. My children are now grown and they're doing their own thing. When my children were younger, they said to me from time to time, "Dad, you're on your phone too much. Dad, you're on your computer too much." And that would affect me, and then I would change, and then I'd sort of go back to the way I was doing things, which was just working, working, working all the time. How is your diagnosis, or how is it not going to change the way that you are as a mom and a wife?
Yeah. Those small moments with the kids, they really add up. And I've just being in the conversations with them, like, how was your school day? And listening and being present, it matters so much. And I learned just with the medical leave, like how much I was actually missing out on those conversations by responding to an email or responding to a text or hopping on a phone call, where those most of the times they were non-urgent things that I could have just done the next day. And I realize how much it means to my family to be present, and even in relationships too, like husbands, girlfriends, fiance, whatever it is. Somebody always has someone, and doctors have such a high divorce rate and relationship failure rate. I think part of it is probably all the distractions. It just takes so much sacrifice to get to where we are. It's like it's meaningful and it has purpose, and you're taking care of human beings. Like what better job is there. Like it's an incredible privilege, but it's been ingrained in us that, we have to just, that's always number one, right? Like you got to drop everything and go, but you have to really take care of yourself, your family, nurture those relationships, put your phone down and spend quality time there. It's
Mm.
important for you as an overall physician and to be able to take the best care of the patients, or for me as an educator, a mentor, I was always, it was easier for me to tell the residents and give great advice to everybody around me. But was I following the same advice that I was giving to the residents or to my patients? No. And that's something I'm going to work on moving forward. I'm going to make sure that I'm following my own advice.
That's really interesting. As you're talking, I'm reflecting about our experiences. When I went to medical school, I was in my early 20s. I went straight through from college to medical school, and I had no other responsibilities other than showing up and being a good student. And focusing on medicine was 90% of my pie. And the other 10% was working out and eating and doing all those other things. But I was able to be selfish in my 20s to focus on medicine. And in my late 20s, I was a resident in pediatrics. Again, 90% of my life was focused on medicine. Then all of a sudden, our personal lives happen. We meet a spouse or a partner, and then we have kids. But that 90% has to go. There's only 10% there if it's maintained. And I think I never thought about it this way. I'm curious what you think. That maybe is part of the conundrum that we have and the conflict, because early in our life we're programmed that it's such a big part of our lives, and then all of a sudden we have relationships, and then we have children and those relationships, and then we're trying to balance between all the craziness in medicine that's happening here. And then, oh, I have a partner, and my partner, I need to be present with my partner, and I need to be present with my children. And it takes time. What are your thoughts about that? Does that make sense to you?
Yes, yes, absolutely. It kind of, what I'm thinking about is I had just had a flashback, right? To it's amazing, like what things you remember. But I just remember, I think it was probably like my first week of medical school. It could have even been the first day, and it was part of orientation. And I remember whoever was speaking at the time said, just tell your families like you're not going to be reachable for the next several years, and that they're not really going to understand it. The only people that'll understand it are other doctors. So they said your co students will get it. So maybe like lean on them, but just tell your family you're probably not going to be available for the next 4 years of med school, and probably however long your residency is, and that's just how it is. Then I was like, okay, I'm I was grateful to be there. I was like, I worked so hard to get to that point. I didn't even get into medical school the first go around. So I was like even more appreciative to be there. And I told my family, I was like, I'm just probably not going to be reachable. That's, it really is ingrained in us from literally day one.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So we we also have this thing in medicine. You had discussed that you're on medical leave, and uh, I've missed 4 shifts in 30 years or so. Due to, now that doesn't mean switches or whatever, but due to blizzards and sickness. And I actually missed a shift last night because my cardiologist said, take a couple days off, and I listened to him. And I felt a little guilty about it. And I'm wondering, how long is your medical leave, and has it been hard to be away?
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, I, it has been really hard. Um, I really would love to be back in the mix of things, um, with the residents and the mentorship, and just gives me a big sense of purpose. But at the same time, I'm so appreciative that I am able to focus now on my health and recovery. And I'm seeing how important that is. And what I didn't realize that I realize now, after several residents have reached out to me, is they they're appreciative that I'm modeling this for them, that it's okay to take care of yourself, and it's important so that you can come back and give back, um, in a stronger way when you return. It was something that I never really modeled before, and to do it now, the residents are seeing it, and I hope that this does have a ripple effect and that it changes how they lead in the future. And I hope that the future generation of doctors has a better balance and better perspective than maybe the way that we were trained to think about medicine.
Yeah, I've also been reflecting on who you are and your profession, which is psychiatry, and which is such an incredibly noble field, and a field where we all practice some degree of psychiatry in all the work that we do. That's my feeling. I don't know if that's offensive to you, but
No,
I feel like, oh, well, we're all engaging with families and treating their emotional needs and mental health needs. And you'll appreciate this statement, that I, as an pediatric ER physician, by far, are uh, pediatric mental health patients, children that present with mental health emergencies, are our most vulnerable population that we serve, by far. And they're the most frustrating. It's the most elusive. I would say it's the most barbaric in some ways. The way that our emergency medical system deals with behavioral health emergencies is very crude. I'm not saying people aren't trying their best, but children are suffering, and sometimes the system does not support them in the ways that they're supposed to be supported. And I can only speak about children. I have a feeling it's the same way with adults when they present with adult. It may be even worse. But one of the things that I'm curious about is, in my field, in emergency medicine, I deal with that. I deal with child abuse, and every single patient I'm with, probably the most important thing I do is supporting their mental health needs in the moment. In any given room, at any given time, families are stressed, and I'm just trying to navigate that and support them as best as possible. And my relationship with these families, even though it's brief, is probably the most meaningful thing for me now that I'm in my third decade of supporting families on a day-to-day basis. So how do you model our own mental health behavior, especially as you're training the next generation of psychiatrists, people who are supporting people with depression and anxiety and adjustment reactions to bad diagnoses, you've had, challenging diagnoses. How do you best model that as a teacher?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you really have to do it, live it, practice it, and model it for it to be effective. If you are preaching, lecturing, it's not as impactful if they don't see you doing it and you
Mm.
sharing your own vulnerable, authentic, real stories with them. I've found over the years the best wellness talks that really had the biggest impact were when people shared authentic stories, like real stories of struggle, perseverance, reaching out for help. Um, that's what I think stays with a person and can lead to changes or personal changes or the way that they react or see things. Um, One thing that we did do as a program that I thought actually was really helpful um, was take some clips from TV shows. The Pit, The Pit is a great show that I like to watch. But we used The Pit, and it's heavy sometimes, but addiction in physicians, mental health struggles in physicians. That's those scenes are there, and it when you don't have your own personal stories, or if you're somebody who just doesn't feel like they are ready to share their own struggles, you could always rely on other clips and the conversations that it led to in the room with the residents were also very meaningful because it just brings it
Mm.
to light in a way that's like, it's not a lecture. It's like more of a discussion. Like, what would happen? What would happen if you saw someone struggling with an addiction? Like, what would you do? It just leads to really good practical type of conversations. Like, what can they do in real life?
You brought up something that's very important to me, which is this idea of being authentic and vulnerable with the learners that we're with. I remember learning when I went to medical school, and sort of the sense of maybe the older physician is that there's a compartmentalization or separation of one's personal feelings to um, I'm the physician, you're the patient, and um, almost like a hard line there. And I feel like the newer generation of physicians, and maybe during the course of our careers, that has shifted in some ways because I had a family, a dad that I met, a child had chronic kidney disease. And I don't know, I must have shared with him that I have boys as well. He has boys and I have boys. And I had shared something about that. And then I saw him again for another visit in the ER, and he had brought that up. He said, I remember you have boys and whatnot. And we talked about it again. And I think it bonded us in a way that allowed me to be even more therapeutic. And, and I share a lot of my personal journey, and HUMED's part of it, with learners and folks that I train and colleagues of mine. What is this? Do you think there's been a shift in medicine about people like us who are teachers and physicians that maybe it's okay to be vulnerable, maybe it's okay to share, maybe it's okay to be authentic? Is it? What do you think about that?
I think it's in the beginning stages still, but I do think that it is shifting, and I am seeing that. And I don't know whether it's the fact that media is portraying it more, or that people are doing more things on social media that you could see the big impact. But it is, I think that sharing, it's a little different with psychiatry because you have to be a bit more careful sometimes with like the boundaries, but um, sharing like some bits and pieces that um, you could relate, the patient can relate to,
Hmm.
is probably leads to more change than if you're just kind of like dictating to them, like these are the instructions. It's the human connection. Again, I think the human connection is the most meaningful part of our jobs and why a lot of us went into it in the first place. So doing it um, strategically with patients is the best way to to be a doctor. And I always tell my residents to be a bit more conservative with what they choose to share. As you gain experience, especially in the field of psychiatry, you intuitively know a little bit more, like, what types of patients you can share certain things with. In the beginning stages, sometimes the residents don't know, or they share too much, and then like it can lead to some other problems. Like, you don't want patients reaching out on your private cell phone, for example. Like, don't give that out.
Of course.
I've had residents do that, well-meaning, really caring doctors, but that's not necessarily the best move either for you or the patients.
Yeah, it's creating good boundaries. I mean, there has to still be some boundaries around personal and professional, but I see that the article that you wrote for JAMA, and similarly to the one that I wrote around my mother's passing and my experience around my mother's death, it's sharing a little bit about ourselves, but those articles, it's being vulnerable and sharing it with our colleagues that allows for us to feel more human. And was it therapeutic for you to write it? Because for me, some of the articles I've written, the essays have been therapeutic.
Absolutely. I that's why I set out to use writing as a processing tool in the first place, because it is so therapeutic. And I was able to turn such a challenging, life-changing event for me into something that could help other people, resonate with others. So many people reached out to me just to say, like, after I read your article, I don't feel that alone anymore.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I feel like I have an opportunity in my professional world as a peds ER physician to work with heroes, the nurses and my colleagues that I work with, and the things we do. And I got to meet a hero today. You are my hero, Jenna, seriously, because of the way you were brave and vulnerable and writing the article, coming on the show here and talking about some things that are deeply personal. It's very meaningful to me, and I hope the listeners of HUMED appreciate that as well. And thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
So those of you that are listening, please follow on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we're at 60,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is kind of exciting and continuing to grow. And we haven't even been airing episodes for a year. It's really been an incredible journey. But for me personally, the most important thing about this journey is I get to meet amazing people like you. And that has been the realization of what I was hoping for when I started. And good luck with all of your medical care. Yeah. Good luck with the way that you change things. I would love to have you back on the show in 6 months or a year and hear how things are progressing, and what other things that you've learned, because some of what you've shared, it's deeply sageful, if that is the right word, but very sage and very wise advice. And I've learned so much from you today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks for listening to HUMED with David Spiro, MD. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. The video versions are also available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell there so that you never miss a future episode.